We're doing stuff. We're doing stuff. We're doing stuff. I think we're doing
You're
stuff.
doing stuff. You're doing stuff.
Stuff is being accomplished in some space or another. That's really what it is. So, Terry, how you doing
Phil.
today?
Hey, Phil, I'm here. What about you?
I'm present. I have a contractual obligation of friendship to represent the generous mug that was sent to me by a good friend, supporting the West Coast footballers, or in other parlance, American football,
And
the 49ers.
The Southeastern footballers here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so we appreciate that, Mr. Unnamed Individual, who we might harass later should he appear in our space.
It's always interesting that he wants everybody to excel more, but he doesn't excel enough to make our broadcast. I'm just going to throw that out there.
Hey, maybe that's to our own good. Maybe that's to his benefit too. Maybe he's better.
Maybe he is excelling more, and that's why he's not here. That's the answer.
Good morning, Paul Hammonds. I hope your semi-recent taco adventures were excellent. I know you got to go to one of the good places a couple weeks ago.
Torchies.
It was Torchies. He had the Torchies experience. Yeah.
By the way, I made a really, really nice baked chicken taco dish a couple weeks ago in those, the wide shell that stand up, hard shell. But they have those in Doritos flavored, Cool Ranch.
Yeah, what's up, Taco Bell?
Hey, but no, at my house, you can get them from the store. They're pretty top notch. I'm just telling you, they were pretty top notch.
Yeah. So topic for today's today is
tacos and how to eat them.
Right. The value of tacos when reaching out to those who are on the edge. That's what
I think if we could get enough tacos to Moscow, we could stop this war. Just saying. We could make somebody happy. You make him happier, maybe he'll quit.
My guerrilla campaign would be to go to the obviously undermotivated Russian youth conscripted servicemen and say, hey,
tacos.
I got tacos in the van. Hop in. Van's not creepy at all. Hop in the van.
Tacos.
I believe we could bring world peace at that point.
Just drive a taco truck through the battle lines and just tossing tacos.
I don't think anyone would complain other than Jill.
Want to see fire? Park a taco truck right in the middle of them.
Yeah.
I mean, we're joking around. The prayers of those people over there. There's several brethren that are still there who can't get out because, like you and I know of a contact that he's helping some families, but the fathers have to stay behind because of what's going on.
It's complicated. Much as everything else can be at times. So it's kind of a wide-ranging subject to talk about this, and to a certain degree, we want to place a couple things on the table. It's a little bit different than direct evangelism to what we would consider either the unchurched, uninformed, uninterested. Like the first contact with someone who maybe you've not met before. This is more likely going to fall into two categories. Either someone that you have a relationship with that's struggling or has had their struggles come to a culmination of some kind, or a family member of somebody you know. At least that's the two areas that I seem to kind of think through and struggle with the best approaches to on a personal level. Like, how am I going to be effective in this individual conversation? And so that wide area, we're trying to narrow it down, and at least get some core principles that I use, maybe some things that Terry has used to be more effective in that area. Is that kind of what, and we talked a little bit about beforehand, is that what you have running through your head, Terry?
Well,
is there anything there?
It's your topic. So
it is my topic.
I'm just along for the ride to go wherever you take us. I think it's interesting that basically the idea is on this edge. What you just said is we're kind of trying to, how do we approach people regardless of which side of the edge they're on? Maybe they're on the edge of leaving, or maybe they're on the edge of coming in, but they're on the edge. This is kind of the idea of pushing for the sale. If you talk about it in sales, you've got somebody right there. How do you push for the sale in a way that's not pushy, I think that's the hard part.
Yeah, and there's and this is something I think also we could quantify as the push versus the pull, because you can do both of those things with an individual who's in this middle space. And some personalities really struggle with the pull. They live in a land of push. And some personalities struggle, significantly with the push because they live in a land of a pull. And that's in the sense of us now understanding people. And so, like, foremost, I want to set this on the table. This is not the time for someone to bring up the possibilities, such as, hey, if you had just never done X, we wouldn't be here. If you had never had that first drink of alcohol, if you had never seen or said that thing, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now. I suspect there are times when that's an appropriate conversation, but never when someone is in these crucial decision points.
You'd have just done what your daddy told you to do.
Yeah. Like, I didn't raise you like that, okay.
You were raised better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
None of those things are actually functionally true because there's a lot of factors that go into the decision process. And so I will just say you got to stop that. If that's something that you think has been effective, I'll just say on the counterpoint, I've never seen it to be substantially effective. It's an after action type conversation. Like, now you're back, you're safe, everything's good. Let's figure out how this played out, how we got to where we ended up. But
that's not even a good conversation then. Like, I think a better conversation at that point is, what can I learn from your situation to help somebody else out? Not, hey, you knew better than this. Like, those are two different approaches.
Yeah, and those actually end up at a better destination when you shift the purpose of the conversation.
Correct.
So for me, at least, when those opportunities appear, I don't go in with a set conversational plan. There's nothing that I say, I'm going to go talk to him about this. I actually go with a set listening plan. And that means that I'm coming with questions that are intended to put people at ease so they can share. And that means that they're at times not as confrontational or direct as I might be in other places. The edges are intentionally sawn or softened so that they land very accessible, and they are very specific to a person. They're not like, hey, this is a general question I ask. It's like, I want you to feel comfortable sharing with me. And that may also include me being very open and very clear as to how we are having this conversation. I don't believe in the idea of, well, you shouldn't tell them, why you're reaching out to them. Like, no, absolutely. I make everything abundantly clear. I talked to your grandma the other day. She's concerned. Mm-hmm. And because your grandma is concerned, I thought it'd be good for us to talk. That's the level of openness that I think is important, because otherwise, when the following conversations come out, that'll be on the table anyway. And so I'm just really open about it, and just say, look, this is where we're at. I also intentionally find a neutral space for them, even if I'm uncomfortable. Because if anyone needs to be uncomfortable in those situations, it should be me, not them. And so I kind of let them pick locations if I can. Can't always do it. But
you don't make them come to the house or the church building to meet you on your turf?
Yeah, no. I'll go just about wherever. And often, just to put it fair, it's Tuesdays. It may be over tacos.
Because it's Tuesday.
Because it's Tuesday. So that's kind of my stepping stone approach. And we've got a couple of guys in the chat. And look, if you've got something that's been successful for you in this space, this is the perfect way to introduce the idea to others and say this is a success point. But so I'm going to make a non-confrontational open with why we're there, And I also have a couple of agreements that sometimes come in and says, look, we're not looking to assign blame to anyone who's not part of this conversation. At this point, like, that's not what we're there for. And so I may include things that say, look, this is not about figuring out who is responsible for the circumstances that you are in or we're in. This is us figuring out, okay, what's going on? Like, let's get to the heart of this, figure out what's motivating, whether that's moral issues, doctrinal issues, cultural issues. All three of those often have the same outcome, which is a drifting away from their community of disciples. Even though they might not seem to be the same, in the end, they're the same.
So I learned a lot from an elder where I trained in Nashville at the now disbanded Riverside Drive congregation. His name was Kenneth Dallas. Kenneth was like one of the most simple country guys you'd ever meet in your life. He was a mechanic by trade. His wife Evelyn and I, Evelyn and I would eat dinner every Thursday night, and then that was the rare occasion besides Sunday, that Kenneth got the Buick out of the garage, and he and I would load up in the Buick and drive to go visit folks. And a lot of times we'd visit folks who hadn't been attending, or maybe visit somebody who like was on the other side of the edge, a family member who needed to learn the truth. And Kenneth would just go in and be the simple guy that he was and talk to him for a few minutes. And then he'd say something like, if they were kind of slowly drifting away, he would just say something like, well, we haven't seen you like we need to. And that's all he'd say. And usually that would open up the person trying to give an explanation to why they weren't there. And it's like you said, sometimes you just go in and I think while you don't have a set script, I think there's a set purpose. And the purpose is with these folks especially, is to let them know that you care for them enough to spend time with them. And in the modern day language, that you want them to be seen and heard. I think one of the downfalls, Phil, you didn't quote grow up in the church like I did, but there's a lot of kids I grew up in the church with who are no longer attending the church. I'm going to say it that way. I think we all know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That folks in my generation especially didn't feel like anybody would listen to them when they had issues with what was going on.
Right.
And part of that's because of this approach. People would just come in, lecture them. You need to be at church, no matter what their issue was. And because nobody ever heard what they had to say, they eventually went somewhere else where somebody would listen to them, or nowhere altogether. So much of this, I guess what I'm getting at for me, really comes down to relationship building. That what really needs to happen here is to build a relationship. Because sometimes what people need more than book, chapter, and verse is the relationship.
Yeah.
And I know that makes us cringe, but Phil, that's just true. And I think that's important to understand.
Yeah, there's a skill that comes in this space that's super important. Communication across generations requires you to translate not only the language that you use, the word choices, but the associated nonverbal aspects of communication and how that comes across. A lot of research has been done to suggest that when you get two generations apart, it's easy to have people who share the same language to now be actually speaking two different languages. So when someone says they don't understand me, they actually, to a certain degree, don't understand one another. The shared experiences are different. The shared memories are different. And so that requires a middle space person, which is part of the role of an evangelist, to exist in a middle space responsibility between God's message and God's designs and the heart of an individual, to be able to communicate across these three different generations. Because that's kind of arguably like you work within three generations, yours, one above and one below. And what you're doing then is modulating your message to fit the wavelength of a person right there. And when I listen to people who are of the younger generation below us, they often say the same things that some of our friends had said. People don't understand me. And you can dismiss it and say, well, no, you're just not listening, you don't like it. But when the reality is there's a large kernel of truth in that statement that, yeah, actually they don't understand one another. Let's fix that. Help me understand what your concern is so that I can translate it into a relatable event or circumstance to someone who hasn't shared your experiences. That's part of like the next step of this. Once you understand and say, this is my issue, and my issue is, I don't feel that I click or connect with the church, or the issue is there are behaviors, ideas, or concepts that, are important to me that aren't being, emphasized. And so, all of those things are powerful components for us to kind of think through and experience. And I think all of that has to be, considered well.
I think
Twitch is
sometimes
an interesting space, by the way. Just want to say that as a side note. You never know what you're going to get with Twitch.
I think the other thing that sometimes they do understand, but we're so defensive that we're more interested in discrediting what somebody says than listening to what they say. And so when somebody says, well, they don't understand me, sometimes our first reaction is to prove them wrong rather than to actually give them the space to say, well, here's why. Here's, what do you mean by that? Explain to me so I understand. Help me understand where you're coming from, and help me know how to address that so we can hear you. I think the hardest part about that, and this goes back to the relationship building, part of that relationship is giving value to that person and to what they say. And so you need to actually look for a reason to give them value. You talked about the communication issues. It's not just language, it's methods. And I've talked about this before, but the generational ways we do things, like don't leave a voice clip for somebody that's in their 20s. They're not going to listen to voicemail. If you pull up their phone, their voicemail box is going to have like a red maxed out letter of voice messages. And if you click 10, it's going to tell you this voicemail box is full. They don't listen to voicemail. If you want to talk to somebody in their 20s, send them a text message. That's what you do. They're not even going to answer their phone most of the time, Phil, unless you're their mom or dad. Like you have to understand that that's just part of the community. And part of that is you have to get out of your box and somewhat into their box to be able to communicate.
Right. And that's when you're picking your comfort zone and like where you're going to be uncomfortable. And so someone in their 70s may be fully uncomfortable texting. You may want to pair up with someone who's got some skills to help guide you through that process, to reach out to somebody and to kind of proof check your message to say, hey, is this coming across the way that I want? Like, did I say something inappropriate unintentionally?
Especially before you use emojis, you might want to double check the emoji talk.
Just don't use emoji. Just like if you don't know what it means, just don't use it.
Yeah, but the problem is they're going to use emojis, and you're going to wonder, what is that? Like, is that praying hands or two people high fiving? And what's going on here?
Right. Yeah. And even with that, Colton talks about the intergenerational conflict that takes place, where you can have wildly different interpretations of behavior and speech in a same generation. Hey, I think that's weird. I'm not sure where that's coming from.
I'm not sure either, but you might want to take care of that.
That's user on YouTube. Hey, we're going to block that business as well.
We're finding all the things.
Wow.
Chris brings this up about your cell phone. It's funny.
Let's just fill the chat up for a second here.
Yeah. My cell phone is not from this area code, and people from church know it's me because it's not from this area code. I found that to be a little bit maybe the opposite, because where I'm at, they know if a 901 number is calling, it is the preacher. It's kind of funny how that's happened. because there's so much junk from your own area code. So there we go. Keep saying stuff, guys. And
one more should clear it out.
One more.
Yeah, somebody will say something soon. I don't have to worry about it. If not, then I'll just make fun of Terry. But like, it's interesting though, if we think about this on a more specific terminology thing, like, what are we going to say that's going to get them to listen? The old caveat of making sure people understand you care about them is really a key thing. And so you've got to approach this. And if we kind of think back to something that Chris had mentioned, the low-hanging fruit idea, listen, ask more questions, and give your narrow advice at the end. One of the things that I think all of us probably struggle with is when to shift into that, here's what would be good to do space. It's easy if they ask, hey, what should I do? What do you think is the right choice? It's hard when maybe in the circumstances, they're not going to be in a place to really do that, to open up and explain in that way and be comfortable that way.
Phil, let me say this real quick. It's okay to go in and not give any advice.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be said. Sometimes you can just go and listen.
Yeah. And just reach out and say, hey, you know what I would love to do is to see you at services. I'd love to see you at church. But if you're not ready for that, I want to keep meeting with you and I want to keep talking. Bob points out something super important on the other end of it. Look, we've tried really hard to address what we see as failings in our own and others' approach to reaching out to individuals over the years. We've talked about it. And also realize that when people care about someone else, they're going to say some things that they probably shouldn't have said, because everyone gets frustrated and tired in that process, and we're hurt, and it's a struggle. I think all of these things have to, be considered. By the way, Paul's little comment about, like, can you lock down the chat? The answer is there's no great universal system to any of that. We do have filters put in place to keep most of it.
So to Bob's question, the reason why there's so much criticism is because sometimes it was warranted.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the sad truth. Not intentional, but sometimes it was warranted. And I think one of the things is just to be aware of that. I'll give you an example of that. When this occurred to me years ago, in the issue of church discipline, which is kind of in this space a little bit because you're wanting that person to come back. We get up and read this really accusatory letter publicly to the whole church, and that person's family's there. And even if that person's not there, they're going to know that was done. And I just got to tell you, looking back, I think that's a horrible way to handle things. And that doesn't mean there doesn't have to be some kind of announcement, but not to the depth that letter is often going to go.
Right.
And that's where sometimes we've just not acted with the best wisdom on some of this. And we've got to be aware of that. Todd says not to take complaints and criticism personally, but I would add, you do need to at least listen to them and see if there's some value to them. And that's, I think, where the problem is. When you take it personally, you get defensive, you automatically discredit it and throw it away, and you don't listen. Sometimes, Phil, those things I took personally had some real value, and I should have listened to them.
Yep.
And how we handle ourselves.
Yeah, I think as we mature as teachers, preachers, evangelists, encouragers, shepherds even, we begin to learn the difference between criticism that is really just a hurt person striking out, criticism that is valuable, and criticism that comes simply because someone's a critic, and that's their nature. All three of them actually have value of understanding. A person who's a critic by nature, they're hurt too, but they're hurt in a way that more often than not cause secondary conflicts that are different than those who are hurt and just lashing out at the people around them randomly. And both of them cause kind of interference issues in this process of reaching out, drawing back in, and kind of really approaching this in a healthy way. So I think also we could kind of consider a few more things in this area as a kind of lasting thought. Remember that you're not going to solve any problem of significance any faster than the problem appeared. Like, if this is a 20-year problem, I don't care who you are, you're not solving it in one night.
Yeah.
And that includes even should the person make every move to draw themselves back to God, and their spiritual slate, if you will, gets a lot cleared up. The problem doesn't get fixed in 24 hours of the rationales that got them there. You need to plan and understand that this is a process. It's very similar to the idea of what takes place in Romans chapter 12, where there's this idea of transformation is an ongoing aspect of Christianity, not a destination.
You know, there's no reason why you can't go to somebody, let's say they're on the edge of drifting away. And if that's happened, by the way, that's been going on for years. That decision wasn't made overnight. If you go into that first conversation and you say, hey, I just want to hear, where you're at. I just want to listen. There's no reason at the end of that discussion you can't say, you know what? I appreciate you talking to me. I'm going to think about all the things you said. I'm going to pray about them. Can we get together again later and discuss further? No advice, no correction. Sometimes that's your best play than to say, well, instead of all of that, you still need to do what's right. Because what happens all the time is when we end that way, they're still not going to feel like you really gave them any consideration.
Yeah.
And sometimes the right play is just to go, hey, I'm going to think about this, pray about this. We'll get back together again. There's nothing wrong with it.
And all of this, sometimes Terry and I talk about like lesson prep stuff or academic research or study skills or just developing a lesson plan or sermon design. A lot of what we're talking about right here is actually the core of the heart of an evangelist. Some people say, well, evangelists are just bold and they get out there on the rooftop and they shout the gospel message. Like, no, that's an image of a part of the evangelist, but the motivation for someone to preach, the motivation for someone to care, it may manifest itself in that zealous behavior, but really it's this gentle heart that says, I care enough about you to care about you. I really think that's something that if we're talking about developing the heart of young preachers and older preachers to continue to maintain their effective work is probably as important as what you read last week.
Well, it's about people. The work is about people.
Yeah.
I think that's the hard thing to remember. It's not about studying. It's not even, it's not about the presentation on Sunday. Your work is about people. It's about their souls. It's about saving the lost. That's why you do this. That's what your heart needs to be set on. And if you make it about that, instead of you being an expert or knowledgeable or an academic or right, when you go talk to somebody, you'll listen to them because it's about people.
Yeah.
And that's the important thing.
Right. And just one last bit of encouragement in this space. This is a great opportunity for you to bring a third voice along at times. A great third voice would be someone to interpret for you. You don't necessarily know their experiences as well as a third party would. Maybe someone shared that same journey. Maybe someone has had a similar setting. So that's a great opportunity to strengthen both parties in that space. Maybe this is a great way to have an elder come with you. Or if you are an elder, bring a Christian who is developing their skills as a shepherd to that table, and seeing those things. And this is why, and this is this space, there's no doubt that biblically speaking, the role of the evangelist does not expect the evangelist to go visit all the sick. But you know who is expected to visit all the sick? Your brethren. And so I strongly encourage individuals to do this. But I make sure that we make a strong distinction between whose work is what, so that on the accountability side, it's on the right part of the table. And it's good, like it's just good to show it out.
Colton brings up hospital visits, for instance. And it's not like you have to go visit the hospital, people in the hospital, because you're the evangelist. You do that because you're their brother.
Yeah.
But the fact that you're an evangelist means, at least most of the time, you have more opportunity to do that than other people in different areas of their work. And so you should seize your opportunity. And I will tell you that the benefit to that, at least for me, Phil, and maybe you too, is my presence at some of those kinds of things has led to Bible studies that has led to people obeying the gospel. And those kind of things, and that gets back to what I said earlier about it being about relationships. You can build relationships in a hospital waiting room better than you can build them in a church auditorium.
Yeah. And there's value to that. And look, you may be sitting there all by yourself in some of those waiting rooms for some people.
Right.
Bring a book, bring a book that's interesting enough that somebody else will ask you, hey, what are you reading? What are you doing over there? And that's there's a way in which you can intercede on the behalf of others that way to be an encouragement to folks around you, even in the complicated context of a healthcare situation.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I had on the table for today for us to kind of think about. This is a seed conversation, not a solution conversation, because I think a lot of the men who have commented and the folks I know who are listening probably also have seeds from their own experience that could be shared. And so my admonition side at the close of our little talk today is to just kind of say, hey, look, reach out to someone who has been effective in the work and talk to them about their success in this area. Like, hey, how do you do it? And have those second tier conversations. I'm sure any of the guys who have commented in the feed today would be someone to talk to. I know a number of them pretty well, and they would bring some value. So send them a message, say, what's going on? That's the second half of this. Sometimes, who needs the encouragement and needs to be checked on? It might be on the edge. It's a preacher. They have struggle, stress, doubts, and difficulties. So
living on the edge, baby.
Living on the edge. There's a song about that somewhere. We're not going to sing it right now because that would be bad. I want to continue to make a statement that we really should be praying for our brethren who are displaced from their homes. There's a growing number of Christians in the area around Moldova and Ukraine whose lives are being flipped upside down. They're not the only ones who are enduring suffering. They're just the ones we're seeing on the news and community sources that right now. We're brethren across the world that deal with that all the time. And we just don't hear about it. So we should really be mindful in our prayers and seek opportunities to be encouragers to those who are recovering from difficulties like that, and continue to pray for one another.
Well, and let me add to that our brethren in Russia are suffering as well for an entirely different reason, but all of the sanctions and everything that's being placed upon them because of the aggression of their government is causing a different kind of suffering for them. And one of those ways you may not realize is that their communication that a lot of them use with family members outside of the country have been severed as a way to try to control information. So this is just a bad situation on all sides. And we need to continue to pray for all of them.
Most definitely. And as always, we sometimes say this, if we can be of an encouragement to you, if we can and somehow help you in your work, let us know. If you got questions or better ideas than Terry and I come up for conversations, drop it into the chat, drop it to us in some way, and we'll happy to add it to the schedule.